Welcome back to another episode of the Return of the Roar Sacramento Kings podcast on Sactown Sports 1140. Right after the Sacramento Kings end an era, trade De'Aaron Fox, get Zach LaVine and draft capital back in return. Obviously, more details that we'll dive into here, but I'm Brenden Nunes. Got Chris Watkins joining me here as well. Chris, it was quite a weekend, and actually not even the biggest trade in the NBA. Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis getting swapped around in maybe the most surprising sports trade in like American history, or up there. I was asking my dad a little, probably educated. Like, is Kareem, probably, I guess, part of that, but it's a crazy weekend. How you feeling?
Yeah, it was a crazy weekend for sure. It was a long 24 hours from Luka getting traded to the Lakers to eventually, De'Aaron getting moved to San Antonio. A lot of emotions felt this weekend for sure. I was kind of talking with my girlfriend, more so screaming at her Saturday morning. What was that? Sunday morning after the Luka trade had gone down. Just a lot of frustration, and then and then to have the De'Aaron and everything kind of come to a head on Sunday as well it's just crazy, man. It's just been a really crazy weekend, and I'm glad that we can kind of finally talk all about it, because it wasn't even just the trade happening itself. It's been the lead up to it and everything, really, again, since the Mike Brown firing, that's led up to this moment. It's just crazy, man. And I know you've been kind of really in the throes of all of this. I definitely want to credit you at the start of this, man, because you've been all over this. I mean, really, even behind the scenes, you've kind of been following this, and Matt George, our friend Matt George, has really, between the two of you guys have been all over this entire saga, and I'm just really excited to kind of pick your brain and kind of get to the bottom of how we got here, and maybe learn some things that maybe wasn't to the public before.
Yeah, I appreciate you. To pull back the curtain a little bit, because we're all friends here. It's,
Oh yeah.
year 2 of full time doing this. So what, year 5 or so? And yeah, I mean, this was definitely the most I've experienced, like, hearing things as everything
Yeah.
was going on.
Same.
And I mean, obviously, it being one of the biggest stories in the NBA, and sure, day before Luka overshadows it, whatever. But in the days leading up, I mean, Chris, we're talking about everything as it's all going on. And like, we reached a point, I don't know, maybe early in the week prior, maybe it's like Wednesday or something, where we're like, God, it was Thursday, actually, because I remember we were a week from the deadline. I remember
Yep.
talking to you and being like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do a week of this. Like, there is
Yeah.
just stuff flying left and right about what direction they might go in. And I think that not necessarily running out there and tweeting a bunch of things, because there's a lot of nuance to all of this, but I think we laid out a bunch of De'Aaron's side of it in the last episode. So you can go back and listen to just kind of how we got to this point with De'Aaron Fox. I think we laid that out pretty well. And I think we can spend this episode just talking about what's next. The De'Aaron Fox era is over. I
Sure.
think he's first in games played, second in points, first in assists, fourth in made threes. And he's up there in Sacramento. I think the Spurs come back into town in March, so that'll be an interesting thing. But I think we can focus on just where the Kings kind of go from here. And maybe we can also start by pulling back the curtain with what we were hearing as this whole process was going on. I think
Where do you
people
want to
would
start with that?
appreciate. Yeah, you might need to help me remember some of these even.
Yeah,
I
I've got
think,
graphics made for all of them, so
yes, plenty of graphics in the archives that I think will be hilarious years down the
yeah.
line to look back on. But I know people don't love to hear like things that almost happened, because it can be frustrating. But I think part of the reason this is relevant is because, I heard like the idea of the Kings feeling like they're having trouble doing things before a De'Aaron Fox trade. And if you look at what they have now, they have all this draft capital available to them that they did not previously. We've talked about it before, but the Atlanta pick being caught up, they spent on Kevin Huerter, first round pick that still has yet to convey. Kevin Huerter no longer on the team, by the way. He goes to Chicago throughout this whole process. But the Kings had a lot of picks wrapped up in different things. They also had 1 second rounder, and now essentially trying to lay out the draft capital that they're working with here. Or maybe I should just say the trade itself. The Kings are sending out, this is a 3-team deal, Sacramento Kings, San Antonio Spurs, Chicago Bulls. And essentially from Sacramento's perspective, they are sending out De'Aaron Fox, Jordan McLaughlin, and Kevin Huerter. In exchange are getting Zach LaVine, CD Sissoko, we're going to call it 2 first-round picks and 5 second-rounders, and that is because one of the first-rounders is a 2025 Charlotte pick that is lottery protected. I could pull up exactly where they're at right now, but essentially Charlotte is going to be in the lottery. They're 4th.
14 wins.
They're 12 and 34. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So they're going to be a lottery team this year.
Yes,
that then turns into Charlotte's 26 and 27 seconds. Pretty good seconds, but they are second rounders. They also got the 2027 Spurs unprotected first-round pick. Interesting to get an unprotected first. You also just sent the best player in this deal to San Antonio to play alongside Victor Wembanyama, and you didn't get any of their best draft assets. So a lot of talks around, hey, are they going to go get another guy? So you don't expect that to be great. And then probably the gem of the deal, aside from Zach LaVine, if you want to call him that, obviously the Kings are thinking of it from that perspective, is this 2031 Minnesota unprotected pick. I think that's the one that could be really interesting. Obviously too far out to project what that draft class could look like in any sort of way. Like people are talking about 2025 and 26 are going to be crazy. I can't tell you anything about the 2031 draft. That's for sure. But unprotected pick that far out, funnily enough, another organization that I think's been compared to Sacramento a lot of how much faith do you have in them remaining relevant and not falling back down. So that's probably the most interesting asset there. And then second round picks in 2025 from Chicago, 2028 from Denver, which I think has like top 4 protections in the second round or something like that. 2028, you got your own second round pick back as well in the deal. So I know I'm kind of throwing a lot here, but to explain the draft capital that they now can trade in a deal, but previously did not have available to them. Now, since the Atlanta pick is top 12 protected this year, top 10 protected next year, you cannot trade those picks, right? And then it would turn into second rounders. Previously, you also could not trade that 2027 first that you own, even though it's not part of the Atlanta deal, but because of the step-in rule, meaning you have to have at least 1 first-round pick every year. Now, you could have had it as a swap for what it's worth, but not straight up trading the pick. But now you have 2 picks that year. You have a Spurs pick, that 2027, and your own pick. And your own pick is going to be a lot more valuable than the Spurs pick, but that means you can now trade that pick straight up. And I think that will have a lot of value. You also can still swap 2028, right? 2029, you could trade away, which was already the case. And then 2030, you could swap, assuming you were like talking about all of these at the same time, right? We're just going through what they have as like a mother deal, I guess, at this point. And then the other being the 2031, where you have your Minnesota pick and you have Sacramento owning their own pick, which is a swap where they're going to get the worst of their own pick or San Antonio's. But big trade. If they were to offer everything they had on the table draft capital wise, they could get up to 4 first-round picks, 2 swaps in 6 seconds. And again, why I think this matters is that I heard that there was at least somewhat of an internal conversation of, hey, it's really hard to do these other deals without moving De'Aaron Fox first. And I think that that's because they didn't have that much of this draft capital available to them. Think of the John Collins deal that we've heard is like almost done or practically done, like sitting there for, I don't know, close to a month. It almost feels like, and it's probably less than that because these last couple of weeks have felt very long, but there's Cam Johnson. I think that's the biggest one that the Kings have been known to be very interested in. And now you have more draft capital to work with in these potential deals. So that is why I expect them to continue to try to make moves and why I think it's relevant to mention the previous names that we heard. Now, some, like the most pie in the sky thing ever of Kevin Durant that was floated around of the Kings, and this is entertaining conversations of the idea of, hey, I think that, part of the logic is De'Aaron Fox is pretty much gone this offseason, no matter what it felt like, unless you did something crazy. And I think that was that logic, right? Of, well, if we kept De'Aaron Fox and we went and got Kevin Durant, then hey, maybe that's a direction we could go. I don't think that is still part of the calculus necessarily, maybe, but I would highly doubt it. Again, I think that was some pie in the sky.
Like that.
I think that was some pie in the sky thing in the first place. What else have we heard, Chris? LaVine was floated around a bunch throughout this whole thing, and I think it's worth mentioning that what they offered LaVine, that offer sheet of 4 years, 80 back in 2018, I believe it was.
Yeah, it was the era.
Yeah, and I think that's worth pointing out that it's, the interest is carried over among multiple front offices, meaning, ownership's the continuous thing that has shown interest here in Zach LaVine. So I think that matters here.
We had initially heard, you forgot the thing that sparked all of this was Jimmy Butler.
That's right.
That was the first one that we had heard. The thing that kind of first sparked, kind of perked our ears up to even look into, wait, are the Kings actually looking to move De'Aaron Fox? Was Brenden, again, I'm going to give you credit here. I'm not going to reveal your sources, but essentially you woke up to a message saying, hey, like, the Kings might look to you might want to get comfortable with Jimmy Butler, as a King or something like that. Essentially, like the
might
Kings,
want to start looking at it.
Might want to start looking at the possibility of Jimmy Butler being a King, essentially, and obviously trying to figure out how that would happen. De'Aaron Fox's name came up, and I think everything kind of spiraled from there. But Jimmy Butler was a name that we heard. You mentioned Kevin Durant. That was really the one where it really felt like we were in the throes of trade deadline rumor mill. Yeah. Everyone always says any of the vets, the Sam Amick's, the James Hams, the Sean Cunninghams of the world will tell you, like, this is rumor season. Like, this is the season where everything gets thrown out. And, it sounds like a cliche, like, oh, okay, yeah, don't listen to everything you hear. Okay, thanks. But truly, like, that felt like a moment where it's like, all right, what is happening? So you're telling me that the Kings are possibly looking at Kevin Durant? That's really where things kind of felt like we were getting into real speculation season. Just some other Spurs trades, I think right before things kind of ended up getting finalized, I think you were hearing that there was a chance that Keldon Johnson was a name that was getting thrown in and out of that trade. Really, yeah, I mean, the Spurs angle of this was the most interesting to follow, just kind of obviously some of the sketchy reporting coming out of San Antonio was interesting, but just kind of seeing, was Stephon Castle on the table? Was he ever on the table? Was Vassell on the table? Was Sohan on the table? What was really being thrown out there? All of that stuff was really interesting to kind of hear the behind the scenes of how all that kind of sparked. But I mean, there was just so much that happened this week. It feels like I've probably forgotten more than I could ever remember.
Same. Definitely chaos for sure. And, they end up with, I think, the most predictable deal in all of it. Like, again, their interest in Zach LaVine was noted for a while. We knew that they wanted to remain competitive, and that's going to lessen, when you're trading away the best player and you're still trying to get a player in return that is going to help you now, that's going to lessen the draft capital that you get in return. There's those super valuable Atlanta picks from the Spurs that I think was kind of what everybody was circling, and none of those get moved. You didn't get any of their best assets. I was also surprised that you didn't get your 2031 swap back.
Yeah, very surprised.
That one surprised me for sure. But again, you try to remain competitive, and some of this has to do with things going to the Bulls. They got their own first back as part of this deal, and that San Antonio ends up sending out as they dump money to Chicago, and Kevin Huerter's part of that as well. But the trade was made official earlier today, maybe an hour before we're recording this, meaning that, for a sec there was a thought of, could they expand this deal? And obviously now that's locked in. There was incentives for all these teams to get it done. Chris Biederman, who, by the way, I think is like the go-to follow when the Kings are on the road, and I don't think Chris gets enough love. Definitely my go-to when I'm trying to see what's going on while they're on the road. Him and Jason Anderson kind of swap off there, but I think that Biederman does a lot of that. Said that LaVine's going to make his debut Wednesday in front of the Golden One Center crowd against the Orlando Magic. And obviously that lines up with this deal getting done here. So again, I think that now they have a lot more draft capital to work with. And as much as I like to think that, now we get to take a deep breath, this week isn't going to be as crazy, I don't think they're done before this Thursday deadline. I think it's going to be some of the same names that you've heard. And there's things that come out of left field for sure. And we've seen that happen in this league, but we've also seen some fairly predictable things with this team, of at least considering the reporting leading up to moments. The Kyle Kuzma trade was heavily talked about before it ended up almost happening, and so I would expect them to revisit these Cam Johnson talks with new assets on the table. And it does get a little funky of, your matching salary now of typically Kevin Huerter and Trey Lyles combination. The main portion of that is gone with Kevin Huerter being in Chicago. And so now it's, Trey Lyles, or what other direction are you going to go in? Are you including Devin Carter as part of this? Whatever that may look like. And we've heard that Devin Carter is sort of a, contentious point when it comes to some of these Cam Johnson conversations. My understanding is that Brooklyn kind of likes him, and that they like him a good amount. And, it's just on Sacramento's end. How much do you want to include that compared to other assets and things like that? So, but the addition of LaVine itself, right? He is playing the best basketball of his career. He's been away from the team for a little while because he just had what I believe is his third child, but 24 points, 4.5 assists, just under 5 rebounds, 51% from the field, and 44% from three on 7.3 a game. I looked it up last night, and both his pull-up threes, meaning off the dribble, and catch-and-shoot threes were above 44%, actually better on pull-up threes, and he takes more of those a game. And the other thing that stands out to me is I think Domantas Sabonis' biggest skill is that he makes his teammates better, and LaVine's never had a player like this. So how much do you think, we're talking Bulls West here compared to they actually have more pieces than what Chicago was working with?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely elements of both for sure. I mean, quite literally, it is a lot of the same core and same thought process, I guess you can say, archetype of the Chicago Bulls. Like, you can say that in a way. I know people say the Şengün, Sabonis, Jokic thing, but Valanciunas, Vucevic is a really, really talented, skilled big who can stretch the floor as well. At one point was a trade deadline darling and was a really skilled center. I think Sabonis is a better version of that, unquestionably. But there's elements of the Chicago West for sure. But I just think that the Kings have more talent. The counter to that also, though, is the West is a lot more talented than the East. And so as much of a balance as it is, I do think it's probably a similar result that this team, as currently constructed, probably can still fight for a play-in. But I think that, there's clearly, if they want to, as they were still with De'Aaron Fox, looking to make the second round or anything past that, I definitely think a move just has to be made, whether it be for John Collins or kind of like you're hinting at there, do they make Devin Carter available? I have started to wonder. I don't know how much they think about relationships and all of this, but we know Keegan was really close with De'Aaron and doesn't seem to be that level of open with everybody. And I wonder if maybe they look to move Keegan Murray because of how maybe he might develop without De'Aaron Fox by his side. So I think that opens up a ton of possibilities like you laid out with all of the picks. I think that they can go for the Cam Johnson, the John Collins route. I almost wonder if some of them getting more assets makes it harder to negotiate in some of those things because now the other team is aware that the Kings have those assets available and now they can really push even further for those things. So I wonder if maybe, I don't know, it really does feel like I wouldn't be surprised at this point. Why not, like, if the Kings get thrown into Jimmy Butler rumors? Why not the Kings get thrown into Brandon Ingram rumors? I really think that everything's on the table here because I don't think the Kings are really, as we've talked about a lot in the last couple episodes, I don't think that the front office really knows exactly what the blueprint is. And so I kind of think every and anything is on the table. And if something comes across their mind that they think is intriguing enough. I think at this point we are fully in the territory where any and everything could happen.
Yeah, definitely. As you laid out, expect more. They have more available to work with, but can complicate conversations sometimes. But there is that hard out at 12 p.m. noon on
Yeah.
Thursday the 6th that I think, forces some of those agreements to eventually happen. But I think the biggest plus of adding LaVine is that this is a team that's the Kings this year, 24th in 3-point percentage, 34.5 a game, and 20th in attempts, 36.1. Christie's been vocal, Doug, about wanting to get that number up to 40. Literally just adding LaVine does that by
Yep.
itself. He knocks them down at a great rate. Again, I think him playing off Domas is going to be fun. I think the other aspect here, and eventually I want to get back to, just your thoughts on the return for De'Aaron and some of De'Aaron's comments and a little bit of that. But I think one of the biggest aspects here that's not being talked about very much is that this almost kind of feels like a bet on Malik Monk in a way. That he's the point guard of this team right
Yeah.
now, and there's no two ways about it. I mean, you don't even really have a backup point guard. Jordan McLaughlin gets sent out in the trade. Not that he was playing any minutes anyways, but he was the only like typical backup point guard. The other guys
Yeah.
you're throwing out there, Devin Carter is a combo guard. Keon was like trying to learn point guard, and the handle's not really there. Colby Jones is a guy that, you're assigning to Stockton all year long pretty much. And so you're committing to Malik Monk as that playmaker. And I think that, there's been a lot of talk amongst the fan base of, hey, I've seen people mentioning that they think Malik can do what De'Aaron does, essentially, or what De'Aaron did. And my biggest hesitation there is that, he's averaging 18 this year. De'Aaron was at 25. And if you start to have that expectation of 25 a night from Malik, that it might feel a little bit different, because I feel like there are more inconsistencies with his play. Not that De'Aaron was an every single night player. Like, yes, he's out there, but he has his slow nights for sure throughout the course of a season, like anybody does. But I think even a little bit more so than some of obviously the stars that he's compared to. But do you feel like there's another step of that Malik could take? He's 26. He's actually only 10 days away from being 27 here. So right around that same age mark as De'Aaron, but getting a larger role, which I guess he had already stepped into a bit, but even more so here as just, hey, this is almost your team to run alongside Sabonis and these other guys, obviously. But do you feel like there's another step that Malik could take here?
I think so. I mean, I think it kind of depends on how big of a step we think we're talking about. But if we're just talking about that step being consistency, I think so. Like, I think it's going to be by necessity. And I think it's a great point that, there's just a big difference in, that the level of expectation and being on this higher up on the scouting report every single night. Like you've definitely talked about it. Like DeMar has definitely benefited when De'Aaron's out there. A couple weeks ago, he was being guarded by Buddy Hield and he was being guarded by Russell Westbrook. Well, with De'Aaron Fox out of the lineup, I guess Zach LaVine probably still attracts the number one guy, but DeMar probably moves up that list. And the same is going to be for Malik Monk. I think Malik moves up the scouting report as well. And it's great to have his little bursts of playmaking, him and Domas in the pick and roll. Definitely expect to see a whole lot more of that, just kind of out of necessity as well. But, I think it's kind of different being asked to do those things in pockets while also at the same time, that you're out there to score. With Malik being the point guard, traditional NBA doesn't necessarily require a Steve Nash or a Rajon Rondo, but it's a little bit different to be asked, okay, like now you, in terms of the offense, are the head of the snake. Like we need you to make sure at the end of the day, if Domas or Keegan isn't getting enough touches, like you need to have that in your mind. And that's going to be the part of Malik Monk's playmaking that I'm just not sure he's ready for. He obviously has, again, the capability of playing in the pick and roll. That's going to work wonders. But I do, and I think you should have questions about just how he's going to be able to functionally run an offense. And again, kind of like you said at the start of this, it's one thing to do it in the regular season. Again, how is that going to look in the postseason as well? And just in general, how long of a commitment is it to Malik Monk as the point guard? Like we know he just signed a contract this offseason, but Is that kind of in the Kings' plans moving forward here in the offseason? Do they now need to figure out who's going to run the show moving forward? Or is this kind of an audition period for Malik to kind of step in and take this new role in his career? I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to monitor. And I think one of the things you touched on there that I definitely want to highlight, because I feel like it's, in my mind, one of the biggest aspects of moving on from De'Aaron here, and specifically this fashion, is that it's the postseason in my mind. Like you mentioned, I think in regular season, this team's going to be great offensively. I think offensively, they might even be better than they were with De'Aaron.
Agreed.
Again,
Yeah.
the shooting.
They're going to be a better shooting team.
Yeah,
For
there's
sure.
a difference in paint touches for sure. But I think that, I also think that De'Aaron's a great fit next to Wemby, which I guess it's an easy thing to be a good fit next to Wemby in a way.
Yeah, I think
But
you and I would be too.
yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
But they're already seventh in offense at this point in the year. They're 17th in defense, though. And it's that offensive production in the postseason that I think is most interesting to me. De'Aaron's first playoff game, both of these guys, De'Aaron and Zach LaVine, have played in one playoff series in their career. De'Aaron had 38 points in his postseason debut, right? And that 7-game series against the Warriors, he averages 27 points, 7.7 assists, 42% from the field, 33% from three, right? LaVine plays against Milwaukee with a broken finger. LaVine plays against Milwaukee. It's a 5-game series. He doesn't play in game 5, so maybe I should have done more research here. He may have also been dealing with an injury throughout this, but didn't surpass 20 in 2 of the games, 19.3 points, 42% from the field and 37% from 3 on 6 a game. So again, maybe there's something he's dealing with here, and it is Milwaukee for what it's worth.
Yeah.
But Kings were going against defending champs in those De'Aaron numbers. So I think I worry about, what that offensive production is going to look like in a potential postseason, but hey, you got to get there in the first place, I guess. And defensively, I don't know that LaVine is helping you here. I think that De'Aaron was a little bit of an underrated defender at times. And I want to point out, as they made this deal official, there is a quote from Monte McNair in the Kings press release here. And I'll read both sides of it as he thanks guys first and then looks forward to the new additions. Monty says, quote, De'Aaron has played a pivotal role with our franchise, and we are deeply grateful for everything he did to support the organization on and off the court. We appreciate Kevin Herter's many contributions to the team, especially as a key member of the 2023 playoff team. We also thank Jordan for his hard work and commitment during his time with the Kings. Probably no point in even reading that, to be honest. More important aspect, quote, as we look to the future, I am excited to welcome Zach LaVine to Sacramento. He's a gifted scorer, and his athleticism will make an impact on both ends of the floor. We also look forward to Sidi Sissoko joining the Kings. A gifted scorer, sure. His athleticism will make an impact on both ends of the floor. I hope so. I think that, I've heard people talk about LaVine being a better defender than people have realized, especially this year. I think the effort could be good. I worry about off-ball stuff. I think that DeMar has been pretty bad at that, and I think that LaVine falls into some of the same. That was one of the things Chicago struggled with a lot, and, I guess I get you. I got to say it a little bit, but I don't know that I'm buying this impact on both ends.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. Like, it's more of an off-ball thing. I think on-ball, he can be passable. He's not going to be De'Aaron. I mean, De'Aaron led the league in steals last year. Is, I think, even right now in the top 10 in steals per game. Zach is a great athlete, so he's going to be able to stick in front of people when he's really locked in, and he's a big body too. He's 6'5", seems to kind of trend more towards like 6'6", maybe 6'7", and we know what kind of leaper he is, so he can contest at the rim again if he's locked in. But I think the big thing is the off-ball stuff, and that's again just being locked in, and some of that too is being in Chicago and not having many winning, not playing much winning basketball. It weighs on you and it affects how you play, and defensive end is really where those teams tend to lack the most. And I feel like there's a lot of that bad DNA that you got to get out. And frankly, I don't think the Kings, especially not as currently constructed, have the kind of DNA to get that out of somebody. And I feel like if anything, yeah, this team is just going to lean heavy offensively, which it might be great. And as we talk about, Malik Monk being somebody who steps up, I do kind of wonder how much of this might be a good opportunity to see some DeMar DeRozan that we heard about in Chicago. He's had some really good stretches. He, I think, just got over this stretch of having 20 plus points in 7 or 8 straight games or something like that. I wonder if, he's kind of been holding back a little bit, knowing that this is De'Aaron's team and he's the young star that this franchise wanted to kind of, at the time, lead the way. With him kind of out of the picture again, I think it's an opportunity for everybody to step up. Domas obviously isn't a self-creating shot creator or anything like that. They still need those guys. Obviously, they have LaVine, they have Malik and DeRozan now. I wonder how much DeMar kind of steps up, and maybe we see a little bit of previous DeMar DeRozan form here in terms of guys who can maybe make this team competitive the rest of this year. But ultimately, I just don't see them stepping up on the defensive end. I mean, they still have all of the same problems that they had with De'Aaron Fox. If not, it's worse now because, like you said, Zach is just not as good of a defender as De'Aaron, even if he is a little underrated.
Yeah, you mentioned, the idea. You mentioned to me yesterday the connection also that Doug Christie and Zach
Right.
LaVine have, both being Seattle guys. Don't know
Yeah.
the extent of that relationship. I'm sure we'll get a better feel, obviously, over the coming days, week or so, or whatever. I mean, shoot, on Wednesday when Levine's expected to make his debut at home. So we'll see. And obviously, yeah, you would assume that he's familiar with Doug's game and the things that he emphasizes. So we'll see how much he's able to buy into that defensive end of the floor. But again, a team that I think is going to be really fun offensively and put up a lot of points. But I know they had the cloud hanging over their head of the De'Aaron thing. With this team just gave up 144, and yes, it's OKC, but they just gave a 144. I think they also gave a 140 plus to the Knicks. Which again, the De'Aaron thing's hanging on your head. Sure, I think that the same way you saw a new energy with this group after they moved on from Mike Brown and went over to Doug Christie. I think that you could see something similar right
For
now.
sure.
Of like, I think it's going to feel good for a little while. I just worry about the long-term outlook of this team because all of these previous deals that we look at, whether it's Donovan Mitchell, Damian Lillard, there's another one I'm forgetting that was recent, but these are teams that are trading away their stars and fully resetting, and deciding to retool. And you could go to James Harden on Houston, even or in Brooklyn. And these teams decided to fully reset. And I think watching OKC, watching Houston, watching Orlando, and some of these other teams that are probably going to end up surpassing you throughout their process of fully resetting, that's where I worry, But I do kind of think that knowing the reality was this team wants to remain competitive, and also that De'Aaron Fox was very set on getting to San Antonio, which he has control to do that, given that, he can say, hey, this is where I'm willing to extend. That's just part of the player control at this point of someone's career. I don't think the return is horrible. I think it definitely could have been better. I think Devin Vassell was the guy that I was circling a lot, and those Atlanta picks specifically. Again, I mentioned getting that 31 swap back I thought would have been valuable. But I don't look at it and think, oh my God, this is horrible. Again, considering knowing that they wanted to retool. I think that's the mistake in the first place rather than fully resetting, but knowing that that's the direction they want to go in. And again, De'Aaron being very clear, San Antonio is where I want to go. I heard the same thing. And we'll get more into that in a second. It's not horrible. It's not great. I don't feel good about it, but yeah, circumstances considered, I guess, how did you feel about the deal?
I feel like it's bare minimum, honestly, which kind of, I guess, goes with what you were saying. Like, it's not terrible. It's not a horrible return. They didn't get scammed or gypped or anything like that, but they definitely did not get the most that they could have gotten. I would not say they got the most that they even I would feel like easily could have gotten. Like, to me, this kind of felt like a in a way, I know, I wonder how much the Luka. I don't think the Luka trade affected this one at all, but I do wonder, just in general, maybe we get past hopefully like the analytics or the nerdification of these trades where it's like 10 pick swaps and all these things, and we can just get back to, hey, we just really want to make this deal happen. Like, what's the cleanest way that we can make this deal done? And that's what I think happened in the Luka trade. I think that they were not really in a mood to haggle over, should we include Dalton Connect, or should we do pick swaps, or should we do protections? Like, we wanted to make sure that we got this deal done, and so we got it done. I feel like there's elements of that in this trade as well, where all parties just kind of realized that this needed to kind of be taken care of, and the Kings did the best they could to try and recoup something, because San Antonio did have a little bit of leverage with that being the case. And so San Antonio, I think, leveraged it about as, and that's the one thing that does need to be said, and I'm sure Kings fans, last thing they want to hear, but San Antonio did an amazing job of this. For them to not get rid of what I would assume would be their best 6 to 8 assets, I mean, they obviously were going to keep Wemby through this. That's not even remotely even thinkable. But to keep Stephon Castle, to keep Devin Vassell, to keep Jeremy Sohan, to keep those Atlanta picks, both of which, like, the Kings should have been able to get one of those assets. I think that, I'm not even a big Jeremy Sohan guy, but I think getting that young player on top of going out and getting, because from my understanding is the Kings were going to get the Zach Collins, Trey Jones, and the picks they got. But instead, we're like, we cannot have that be our return. Let's try and figure out how to get some player of value in this. And that's how Zach LaVine gets in this. I just feel like the Kings should have been able to get Jeremy Sohan and a Zach LaVine. Could they have gotten Devin Vassell and Zach LaVine? Could they have gotten, maybe instead of the Charlotte pick, could they have really haggled to try and get one of the Atlanta picks? Like, that's where it feels like they lose the trade for me, but it's not a terrible return. Again, it's just not the best that I feel like they could have done.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I think I was kind of eyeing, you want one young asset that is up and coming. I mean, the future of the Kings, I think, is a little questionable, obviously, at this point, of like long-term outlook.
Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis
and Devin Carter. Yeah.
And Devin
like
Carter.
That's really all you're working with here. And we don't even know that, like, I couldn't tell you right now confidently.
I mean, what, Keon's on another year as well?
Yeah.
Keon's like one more year on his contract. I think Keegan's got one more year until he's rookie extension eligible. And Devin Carter has played for half the season. And frankly, like the past 2 weeks, it's been a tough watch.
Yeah. And Keegan, by the way, a funny aspect of all of this is, like, Keegan is extension eligible this offseason, and his play, like, I mean, there's no reason for him to not wait until you reach restricted free agency from his perspective. But that's a weird wrinkle in this whole season for sure, as his touches have gone down. And he hasn't had a great year himself, obviously. But no, I mean, I think you're right. And part of me wondered, as you were laying out, like, maybe you haggle for this Atlanta pick. I almost wonder, like, how the Spurs swapped one of their own picks for 3 other firsts that were less valuable. Like, from the Kings' perspective, I almost wonder if they could have viewed it as more valuable to get 3 more mid-tier first, well, really 2 mid-tier first, rather than like one really promising one, because then you have more to work with, thinking that they're going to try to do something before Thursday. I don't know that. I don't know that that's the case. I'm just kind of trying to piece things together as you're walking through things there. But yeah, I mean, I think that ideally you get a little bit more, but it was a little bit of tough circumstances. I think it's also funny how much Kings fans are just totally on Rich Paul throughout this whole thing. And I think not realizing that Zach LaVine is a Rich Paul guy in this whole thing. I feel like, everybody's like, God, Rich Paul just totally screwed the Kings here. And I'm like, well, he did just bring another one of his clients over here.
Right.
Kind of just swapped one for the other, which, interesting wrinkle. But yeah, I mean, I think the other aspect here is obviously De'Aaron. And again, didn't dive into it too much because I think we laid it out how we got to this point, really just all of last episode. So you can go back and listen to that. I think it's all still relevant. and he put something out, just a quick little social post that I want to read really quick, and then kind of dive into some of the things I heard a little bit as well. De'Aaron said, quote, "I can't quite find the words to express what I want to say, but thank you. Coming in as a 19-year-old kid and leaving as a 27-year-old man, I'm grateful I got to spend the beginning of my young adulthood here. The love for this city is unmatched. To the fans, y'all deserve the best. I wanted to end my career here and never expected it would end this way, but I'll be grateful for your support. But I'll always be grateful for your support. Thank you for the love you've showed me and my family. Sacramento will always hold a special place in my heart. Fox." So just to reiterate some of this, I think that Kings fans right now could roll their eyes at I wanted to end my career here and never expected it to end this way. I think that was very genuine. And again, laid out in the last episode, how it seemed like he got to the point where he was just over it. But think about it from the wording, the explanation that I've been using a lot, and sometimes fans don't seem to love it, is that, as frustrating it is from your fan perspective, which I think a lot of Kings fans are feeling that way right now. Think back to the last 7-8 years that De'Aaron's been a part of this team. I think it would be even more frustrating from a player perspective when your livelihood is like directly on the line, your legacy's on the line, and eventually just got to the point where he was fed up with that stuff. But the other thing I want to throw in here is that, part of the reason it was San Antonio, like I heard as well, that, he had no interest. He didn't really want to go to Miami. He didn't want to go to Houston. Everybody's like, oh, Houston's home. Sometimes not everybody wants to go home. Sometimes it's not always a positive. That San Antonio was the place, and he's not a big city guy. Like I got told that part of the reason he likes San Antonio is because the city reminded him of Sacramento. Like I think there was a genuine appreciation for the city of Sacramento that De'Aaron had, and established a family here. His kids are named Poppy and Rain. The California flower. He tweeted, "My California Poppy," when she was born, and Rain. I mean, that sounds like a correlation to the Kings to me. Like, I think that this guy genuinely wanted to be here, and it got to the point where he kind of had to look around and realize, this is my prime. What do I want? And so, again, it was never De'Aaron asking out. It was getting to the point where, damn, you guys are really going to trade me before you go get these wings forwards that I've been saying that I feel like we need for a long time. And in his mind, it's how am I really going to get to compete? Again, he's been in one playoff series, so I think that, just kind of last thing I wanted to say is that I think that it is very genuine from De'Aaron's side, and it's kind of a shame it got to this point. And, of course, he's going to kind of look like the bad guy throughout some of this, but I do think some of that is, natural throughout this process. But I do think that he had as a genuine love and appreciation for the city and these fans, and when he comes back around, I think it'll be cool in March.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a thing to echo for sure, because it's a question that I've gotten a lot from people who have asked me about the situation is, hey, people in my group chat are telling me, like De'Aaron didn't want to be here. Like, is that true? And all I can say is everything that I've heard and you've heard as well, but you've told me, is that it's been a consistent message. I mean, De'Aaron had that infamous video that I think was with the Players Tribune, where he talks about, his love for Sacramento and why he wants to make it home, and it's been that way since then, since he was drafted, to weeks before he was traded, to the week he was traded, to, I mean, I'm pretty sure you heard all the way up until the weekend. Like, hey, De'Aaron still does not, even with everything that's gone on, even though all of this is public, it's not out of the question that this could have been saved if they really, really, really wanted to do that, because De'Aaron wanted to be in Sacramento. And it's not something that, it's convenient for him to kind of now say this messaging of, I always wanted to be here. He has always said that he wanted to be here. People around him have said he loves Sacramento, wants to be here. And just hearing what you said about what he said about San Antonio, it hurts, but it also feels really good to know that it was legitimate, and it really was like he really loved this place and the energy that it gave off, and I think that means a lot coming from somebody who is from Sacramento, but knowing how people who live in Sacramento and are from Sacramento feel about this place, just knowing that he legitimately, and Cousins, to his credit, did the same thing, and Kings fans loved Harry Giles because the same thing. If you legitimately feel like, or if Kings fans, Sacramento people can feel legitimately like you understand them and love the place that they love, it's just a different kind of connection, and I think that's why you see so much emotion right now going on with this move. Is I think a lot of people feel like, as De'Aaron was here for 7.5 years, people kind of do feel like De'Aaron Fox is the Sacramento Kings. I put out right before the OKC game, he's 30 games away and now ends 29 games away from being the Sacramento era all-time leader in games played. A lot of people kind of don't know Kings fandom without De'Aaron Fox. And so, I know that Kings obviously have been rooted in this community for 35 plus years, but there's some people in this area who really didn't start paying attention until they got to Golden One Center. And that is the De'Aaron Fox era. And I think that part is something that I'm just constantly reminded of, is that this is some people's first heartbreak. Some people didn't go through this with DeMarcus Cousins. Some people didn't get to experience the Mitch Richmond years before they ended up being the best team in the world, it felt like. Some people only got to experience the De'Aaron Fox era of Sacramento Kings basketball, and it's just crazy that a guy kind of much like Luka Doncic, there's a lot of parallels, a guy that I think some people thought might have been in their lives the rest of their adult life or whatever. It's just, I think, really tough for a lot of people right now to see and even imagine him not in a Kings jersey.
You know what's wild is people get on me for this, but whatever, is that like I've never been to a Kings game where De'Aaron's not on the team.
That's
And
crazy.
that hadn't crossed my mind
that's
until you
crazy.
said that right now. Like that's wild. And I'm sure
nuts.
I'm far from alone, so yeah, kind of wild. I'd imagine from his perspective, after he's able to kind of settle throughout all this, that it's got to be a little relieving that now you can just
For sure
play basketball. You can, all this drama is behind you, figure out the extension that I'm sure that San Antonio is going to offer. Why else would they have done this deal? Obviously, I think clearly they liked Fox throughout this process. And he gets to just take his hands off of worrying about any of it. I don't think he ever wanted to in the first place. But now you can trust an organization, and I think that was the biggest thing. And obviously having Wemby is a big piece of this. And I could sit here and gush about how I think this is going to be a fantastic fit for De'Aaron, of the paint touches that De'Aaron's able to get and the spacing that Wemby provides. I think that's a beautiful combination, like the speed that he provides alongside Wemby in that two-man game. I think also him being back with Harrison Barnes is very funny as part of this.
Hilarious.
Obviously, they have a good relationship.
I also don't sleep on Mike Brown joining the San Antonio staff.
Oh my God, I didn't even think about that. That would be the funniest. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. What's Pop's future like? How fun. Oh my God, bro. Oh my God, you're hilarious. I also think he's never had a rim protector behind him.
He's literally never had a rim protector like Wemby either.
Who? Hey, Willie Cauley-Stein,
Sean Holmes, and Willie.
Yeah,
and Malik. Those are the lob threats.
Yeah. So, Justin James, Daquan Jeffries, yeah. So JaVale, don't sleep on JaVale. Yeah. So I'm.
How could I?
I think it will be. I'm going to be watching Spurs games. I can tell you that. I think that's going to be a blast. Sure. Already plenty of reasons to watch Spurs games, obviously. Also, a little curious, Chris Paul, I think they've really liked this year. Expiring. De'Aaron's got the finger things going on. Do they decide to be like, hey,
I've thought that as well.
Maybe just get this surgery, and we'll let CP play out the rest of the year. So we'll see what ends up going on there. Long term, Stephon Castle next to him. We'll see. So definitely interesting. Lot to unpack, and I'm sure there's going to be more we'll dive into. We'll get further into LaVine's fit, obviously, as he starts to play a couple games here. They play in Minnesota tonight, and very curious to see just kind of how this all pieces together. Again, I think that I think the Kings are going to be fun still. And for whatever that's worth, I don't know how serious they're going to be when it comes to any sort of postseason. At very least, I think they still should remain in this play-in conversation. But we'll see. It's the end of an era for the Kings, really. And moving on, fully resetting. I think in our group chat the other day, someone pointed out, it might have been you, that Domas longest tenure guy now, which is pretty wild.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy. I think it's 3.5 seasons?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton are on other teams. Is it a confusing weekend for Vlade Divac with Vivek or with De'Aaron and Luka getting traded? Like for about 24 hours, he was right. De'Aaron lasted longer in Sacramento than Luka lasted in Dallas. No, it doesn't make him right, but
I don't think he's right.
Yeah.
There does need to be some sort of record keeping that this is Vlade's fault. Like if Vlade drafts Luka here, I would like to think that the Kings wouldn't have traded Luka to the Lakers. So
yeah, I don't know.
I'm placing my opinion on Vlade.
Yeah, I think fair. All right. Is there anything else that we're missing out on before we get out of here?
I mean, there's so much again that I feel like we've forgotten already, but that I feel like we did a good job here.
Yeah, I think we walked through a lot of it. Obviously, going to have more content coming in. We got content on the written side on sactownsports.com, Sactown Sports on socials, whether that's X, Threads, Instagram, all of the above, and obviously shows 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Sactown Sports 1140. Our podcast available on the Sactown Sports YouTube as well, where we got a bunch of shows are getting packed with interviews, making sense of all the different angles of this. San Antonio's angle, Chicago's, what LaVine brings to the team, but all of the above, really. So definitely check out all of that content going on, and be sure to like, subscribe, rate, review wherever you're at, audio or video side, to the Return of the Roar podcast. Stay up to date as we keep you in tune with everything that continues to happen here as the Kings approach this Thursday, February 6th trade deadline, and everything pointing towards them probably not being done. So we will see. De'Aaron Fox on the San Antonio Spurs, Zach LaVine, and a handful of picks in Sacramento here. We will keep up the coverage and appreciate everybody listening. That for Brenden Nunes and Chris Watkins on Sactown Sports here. Thanks for listening.